name is Marc Saxer, and I have two problems. Number one, I'm a German, and everybody knows you have to start TED Talks with a joke, and Germans don't do jokes. That was your first German joke. Thank you for getting it. Second, most TED Talks here today have been about driving change, which means driving change in your personal life, changing yourself, changing your career, changing your community, maybe a company or an industry. The change I want to talk about today is bigger than that. It's actually systemic change. The question that I want to tackle is, how can a society change direction? Change of this magnitude, systemic change, does not happen naturally. Change of this magnitude is not an automatic thing. Neither can it be done by design. So it's not the outcome of research, which is something that you don't want to hear here at the university, because you probably believe that facts and figures change the world. They don't. Change is the outcome of a struggle between those who want to uphold the status quo and those who want change. Next slide, please. And usually, the balance of power is tilted heavily in favor of those who want to uphold the status quo. Obviously, because that's why it's the status quo. So that means if you want to drive change alone, if you are an individual change maker, you do not stand a chance. So the first challenge for change makers is really to come together and join in a broad societal coalition for change. That, however, is the problem. The problem is that individuals, actors, social groups have different interests and priorities. So it's very difficult to find a common denominator. So maybe you just start doing something to the formula, nothing is more successful than success. So first go to the low-hanging fruits and ask the question, what kind of win-win situations, what kind of win-win projects can we do together that are actually the lowest common denominator between different interest groups? That's actually a pretty good idea, because that means you can get something done, and it actually means that you build a coalition around these little projects and do something. Next. These transactional coalitions, or coalitions of the willing, indeed can get stuff done. They can create some success stories, and these are very important, as we're going to see later. They also do more than that. They not only get stuff done, they also create trust amongst actors. They create some momentum for change. So altogether, a good start. However, and this is the big but, you only get so far with it. Sooner or later, you hit what you call the glass ceiling of change. Sooner or later, you run into the resistance of those who believe that the status quo needs to be upheld, or sooner or later, you just run out of projects that are win-win. And then the real problem and the real challenge starts. You need a much broader alliance to break through the glass ceiling. Next. So the operation that needs to happen here is that you have to turn people that for whatever reason believe that their interests are best served in the way the things are and the way the status quo is, you have to bring them into the change camp. So what can you do when you cannot talk about interests? It's not a very abstract thing. This is something that you have every day in your life. If you want change, you talk about people about climate change, you talk about inequality, all these things. People hear your arguments, yet they do not change their behavior. So what can you do? Next. Actually, what you do is you change the frame of reference within which people define their interest. We all live in a bubble. We hear certain filtered information, we watch certain news media, we talk to people who are friends and colleagues. That's the bubble that we live in. This is the echo chamber that forms our worldview. This is the frame of reference within which we define our interests. So you cannot go to someone and say, you change your interest. He's going to laugh you off. But you can change the frame of reference within they define their interest. And that is actually what needs to happen next. There is two ways of doing this. One technique I call transcending the paradigm. So basically, if you are stuck in the here and now, you transcend, you project into the future, which is a more neutral space. How does that work? You basically change the imagination of what's possible in the future. When you change the imagination of what's possible in the future, you change the expectation how the future will unfold. When you change the expectation how the future will unfold, you change the interpretation of where you stand right now about your situation. When you change the interpretation of where you are right now, you change your calculation of risk versus opportunity. And risk versus opportunity, that's how we define our interest. So by changing the expectation about the future, you actually change the way people define their interests. And this opens the way for cooperation between actors that so far have been in different camps. Next. The second operation is called bridging the paradigm. So if you have something that seems to be a trade-off, mutually exclusive, a clash of interests on the policy level, we have to dig deeper and create a synergy, a synthesis on a deeper level. Think about the most important thing that's going on right now on our planet, which is probably the survival of our species, which right now is endangered by climate change. Everybody in this room knows it. Everyone knows it. Very little is happening. The reason why very little is happening is that since the Industrial Revolution, some 150 or 200 years ago, at least in the West, but certainly also in India, we perceive economic growth and environmental protection as a trade-off, something mutually exclusive. You can have either or, but you cannot have it both. So think about this echo chamber that I was talking about, this room, this political field, this discourse field, as a map. And in this map, there is a rather arbitrary coordinates, but these are fairly common. So you can have an attitude between market and the state. You can say, market's the solution, state's the problem, or you can say, state's the solution, market's the problem. And you can have an attitude towards growth. You can either think that growth is a problem, or you can think that growth is a solution, right? So traditionally, there is two discourse communicate who dominate that field. One of them is liberal, cares about markets, cares about business. The other one is socialist, cares about labor, and cares about distribution. They have been dominating the discourse field for the last 150 years. Next. So in 1972, something extraordinary happens. The Club of Rome, which is a group of some of the best researchers of the time, published a report which was called The Limits of Growth. If we would have listened to these people, we would not have a problem with climate change today. But as I said in the beginning, change is not the outcome of facts and figures. This report was dismissed. Why? talk about today, but the interesting stuff is actually that concepts have been invented at some time. So it was invented in the 1990s. It was a clever little discourse because it was not anti-growth as such. So it actually moved into the center of the discourse field, but there was a bad luck. And the bad luck was at the very same time the socialists moved towards the market, the so-called neoliberal turn, third way, New Labour, Tony Blair, Bill Clinton, Gerhard Schröder. There was no alliance between the two. Next. So in the 2000s, something extraordinary happened. And it happened on the level of policy, and it was very narrow and very thin, and people hated it at the time. Just click once. Emission trading was introduced. I don't want to talk about emission trading right now. I want to talk about what it did in the discourse. What it did in the discourse is that the very first time, it translated what the green community wants into the logic of the market. And for the very first time, it translated what the liberal pro-business people wanted into the logic of the green community. Next. Carbon Development Initiative did the very same thing for the sustainability and the socialist community. Next. So in the 2000s, this thing was consolidated, next, with the green growth paradigm. Green growth changes the equation, the relationship between economic growth and environmental protection that has been there for 150 years. What used to be either or is now two sides of the same coin. Green growth is a discourse, a narrative that tells you that if you want more growth, you need green products, you need efficiency, you need green energy, you need green markets, you need, next, green jobs. That was the discourse shift that it was introduced, next, and the whole package was called the Green New Deal, next. So what the Green New Deal did was actually create a framework, a lens, through which key constituencies like capital, like political office holders, like civil society, like media, like academics, even militaries see and view the future. So they interpret what is going on and what needs to happen through the same lens. And that actually opened the way for cooperation. So, how do we get from discourse into action? What's needed are entry points. What's needed are projects where people can come together, do together, make some change, and get moving. And these projects I call catalytic projects. What makes a project catalytic? Number one, it needs to be able to scale. Second, it needs to be transformative. So you kick off that little project, but it needs to have repercussions well beyond the project itself. It needs to unleash structural drivers of change. Third, it needs to exemplify change. Nothing's more successful than excess, I already said it, but also seeing is believing. So basically say, look, there's a formula, it worked nicely here, why don't you copy it and try it somewhere else? So you can mushroom from one little project to many little projects. Fourth, you need to have this coalition of the willing, the transactional coalition. So that means you need to have people whose interests are served in the here and now with that project. But at the same time, and I already said, it also needs to be a platform for discourse alliance. So you need to be able to tell a story which resonates with more than one group. It's very difficult. That's why I give you an example again. In Kolkata, they have changed the park lights from conventional lights to solar lights. That was a project that they did a couple of years back. Is that catalytic? Yes or no? Let's do the test. Does it scale? Oh yes. It was replicated in almost every city of India, and there's actually no reason why it would not be replicated somewhere else in the world. Is it transformative? Absolutely. It created an economy of scale. the unit price for these little lamps goes down considerably. There's a market now, and there's a demand now, so it's transformative. Is it a success story? Yes. You cannot believe how many people told me about that little project. Wherever I go, I hear about the park lights of Kolkata. Why is that? Because number 4, it was a nucleus for a social coalition between interest groups. Also, the city of Kolkata was very interested because these little lights saved 60% of electricity cost, so the fiscal coffers, the fiscal officers were quite happy with the project. Park goers were happy because the parks are well lit after dark, and entrepreneurs, what many of you aspire to do, were happy because these lights are locally produced and you can make a nice buck out of it. What's interesting about the project, and that's why I bring it to you today, it's also creating a narrative, which is fascinating. So I think it goes without saying that solar lights are popular with the green community. They are also popular with the law and order crowd, because it basically is something that makes the streets safe after dark. It's something anti-crime, so that community loves it. It also resonates very nicely with women empowerment, because if you make the streets safe, you actually open the space for women after dark. So you have a project, a little project, that brought together a lot of people with the same interest, but also tells a narrative that goes well beyond your little NGO and what that tries to achieve. So what I'm trying to tell you is, you do not have to convince people to do the right things for the right reasons. It is wonderfully enough if they do the right thing for whatever reasons. Next. This method for driving change that I just presented to you is called transformative change making. It has 3 elements: an alternative vision, a change narrative, as well as catalytic projects. Next. Alternative vision is the vision of a better tomorrow, the practical utopia, which is not arbitrary, but something where the interests of key constituencies converge. That is a strategic place. Second, a change narrative, change you can believe in, which tells you how you can achieve this alternative vision, and does it credibly. So you need facts and figures, yes. You need to explain how is that possible. But you also need an emotional tale, a moral tale. You need to tell why the doable is the morally right thing to do. This is your platform for your discourse align. And number 3, catalytic projects that actually translate discourse into action, something people can come together, join hands, cooperate, a site for struggle, something to make an entry point, something to start change. And this is how you drive change. Thank you very much.